If Lisa's going to be a hard act to follow, that was wonderful. So coming up here, it was strange to give a talk before, as I am significantly younger than a decent proportion of you. And I do believe that with age comes wisdom. And so it's sometimes hard to think of what I can possibly contribute, especially when it comes to Martin Luther King Day. I feel like it is always strange for me to talk about Martin Luther King Day. I've never felt particularly connected, not to say with the civil rights movement, but with the energy and the sense of celebration that comes with celebrating Martin Luther King Day in this country. That's not to say I don't see the struggle, but sometimes I think I feel jaded, and that to celebrate Martin Luther King Day is almost, or to hold him and the movement, him as the head of the movement, of the civil rights movement, seems difficult, especially right now where we've done what feels like a lot of backsliding, with nationalism on the rise and white supremacy and all of that. Celebrating is difficult. We're obviously in a long journey. And to some extent, I think sometimes that is because Martin Luther King to me is an intangible person, an intangible idea. I've seen pictures of Martin Luther King. Everyone has, with all the mics are in front of them and saying something that I'm sure is profound. We've all either read, been read, have seen video of his I Have a Dream speech. But there's no reality in it for me. It is a historical context. But just on the same vein, it's also hard for me to believe that people were ever hosed down in the middle of cities, or that there are children in cages now, or that there are families being set apart. It feels like this great intangible idea. And I think largely that's because I am an observer of people, as I believe most people here probably are. I like seeing people as flesh and bones, and as brains, and as humor. And that to me is the reality of people. So observing people from a distance is very difficult. I like to see a lot of things in people. I like to, if I see you on a regular basis, I know what your walk is like. I can identify your walk in a crowd of people, which is not creepy, I swear. I like to memorize people's facial expressions. I like to find out what all their little mannerisms, what their little tics are. If they'd have hand gestures, like my rock back and forth when I'm speaking, I would notice that if it was you. Things that draw my attention. I don't like to look into people's eyes, but I like to read the emotions in people's eyes. The things that they don't say, especially teachers. Teachers are great. Their eyes say a lot and their face says nothing. It kind of creeps me out. But I love observing people. And I have a great ability to read moods when people come in the room. I can see the cadence and the way that they speak, and I start to rely on that and get thrown off when it is different. I like to see the differences between people as they speak to one another. The difference between, say, speaking to Reverend Samantha versus speaking to a greeter at the door. There's a different dynamic that happens between people when they perceive each other in very different ways, in different relationships, and in different roles to one another. When they are irritated, when they're annoyed, when they're irritated with themselves, when they're irritated with others. These are just all things that I love to watch. That Sherlock Holmes reference, actually. I love reading faces and reading body language. And so I may not understand you, but I understand the way that you choose to express yourself and the face that you decide to put out into the public. And I respect that. And I accept that entirely. That is who you are. And I consider that as something I can't necessarily change, and nor would I want to, unless you're a jerk, and then that's a different story. But I love seeing people's intelligence and people's mirth and people's laughter and the way that people are connected together, whether it is through sorrow or through pain, and when it is not masked in any way. And I think that there's a great depth to people that is surprising no matter how many times you hear something from somebody that you didn't expect. That somebody had a life or death experience, that somebody once rode a bus around the United States, that somebody once, I don't know, played piano in Puerto Rico, that somebody did something. There's always something about someone you don't know. And so when I think about Martin Luther King Day, it's a celebration of one person that I don't know in a movement that, while ongoing, is still intangible and I don't understand. But these face-to-face meetings are the things that I do consider important, and despite, media nonsense about what you should wear and who you should hang out with and the best bag that you should have that kind of overrides, it's never made sense to me. I don't know why pricier clothes or better meals or better access or social popularity have made people superior. Race, gender, orientation, culture, to me, they're just things. They're things that are associated with you. And much like Lisa, perhaps the reason why I don't place any value on these things is because I didn't grow up black, and I didn't grow up Hispanic either, even though I'm both of these things. I grew up as a Panamanian and a Kenyan influenced, perhaps Kenyan and Panamanian adjacent person. I was light-skinned for a black person. I was curly-haired for a Hispanic person. I did not speak my mother tongue of Spanish or Kikuyu or Swahili, and I was never really like all the other girls anyway. And so I grew up out on the margins of marginalized people, never quite belonging, and thanks to my family, never willing to conform into anyone else's idea of what I should be. And it is a constant reminder to me, like I'm that kind of person who forgets to look in the mirror before they leave. I have to constantly make sure, oh, did I put on the right clothes for the thing that I'm doing? And I realize that that is particular to me, and that a lot of people, it's not that they place judgment, but they place presumption on the way that you might look, or the way that you might speak, or the way that you might carry yourself without any depth. They're not looking for that hidden surprise in you. They're looking for the surface. But again, that being said, I also remember the first time that both a black person and a white person told me how well I spoke, especially as a black person. I remember someone telling me how great my test scores were, even though I was a Hispanic person. I remember the first time someone told me I was pretty for a black girl. Such a compliment. I remember the first time a white person came up to touch my hair when it was natural and not like this, to tell me how curly it was. It was very surprising to me. I hadn't known. And particularly, I was raised in primarily, my mom worked in the school district, so I was raised in the more affluent schools. And so it wasn't really until I got to college, and there were more significant discussions of race, other than a Martin Luther King Day celebration, that I realized that there are times when I'm the only person of color in the room, or I'm the only person who does not make a salary that most people think is a livable wage in the room. And I remember the first time that I was told very distinctly how I was just not Hispanic, because I look black on the outside, which is news to me. I had no idea. And so now, I am a choir director. Obviously, you will see some of that here in a second. And I operate as a black and Hispanic and queer person in a primarily cisgendered white world. Sometimes I call choirs like the elitist white sport, just because of access. And that is not to say that there are not many varied choirs. But in most of the communities in which I operate, I am typically one of the only people of color. And often I'm asked to do things like this. And that's not to say that I dislike them, or I don't value them, or I don't see where they come from. But it's very, very interesting to be asked to be a representative on Martin Luther King Day, or Indigenous Peoples Day, because I am brown, or Pride, because I am queer. It's always interesting to be asked to provide some sort of representation on those days, when it is not inherently how I would identify myself. And so in thinking of trying to find something to say for today, the only thing I could think of, musician, right, are rally songs. The songs that I know that bring people together, regardless of their race, for different purposes. Lift Every Voice and Sing is obviously very, very well known. It was started a couple years ago. Dr. Schauer at the university started a program called One Voice Arizona. That's to get people singing together. And Lift Every Voice and Sing was one of the first pieces that she selected. Some things like my land, this land is your land, my country, 'tis of thee, de colores. A whole bunch of different songs that get people singing together. Much like We Shall Overcome, one of the most iconic songs of the civil rights movement. We Are Gentle, Angry People, or Singing for Our Lives by Holly Near, part of the women's movement and largely part of the gay movement. And there are songs that have been sung for decades by and for marginalized people to unite and unify and to signify this hope for progress or for a better future through this idea of solidarity, kind of trying to find a shared experience between everyone. And so, again, coming back to trying to figure out what I was going to say today, I was like, what does Martin Luther King Day and what does Martin Luther King signify in white spaces, especially as someone who doesn't fit in with that? I don't identify as a black person or a Hispanic person in a white space. I was like, I wonder what it means, especially for a congregation like this one that is so for social justice. Y'all show up for everything. For everything. You do everything in this town. There is not a social justice event that there are not at least a group of you there for. And so it'd be a very different story if I was in a very, very, I don't know, uptight, I don't even know, a fundamentalist church celebrating Martin Luther King Day. I think that would be a very different experience. But it caused me to ask, like, why do we do it here? Or why do progressive white spaces tend to place such priority on Martin Luther King Day or Pride Day or whatever it is? And it made me think of a quote. I really love Invisible Man by James Baldwin. And there's a character in there that says, I am an invisible man. I am a man of substance, of flesh and bone, fiber and liquids, and I might even be said to possess a mind. I am invisible, understand, simply because people refuse to see me. Like the bodiless heads you see sometimes in circus sideshows, it is as though I've been surrounded by mirrors of hard, distorted glass. When they approach me, they see only my surroundings, themselves, or figments of their imagination. Indeed, everything and anything except me. And I think on a national scale, that is a very good picture of what Martin Luther King Day might mean. Because while segregation is gone, there are still systems in place that make it impossible for non-cisgendered people, trans people, non-binary people, people of color, of any kind of color, to get access to basic necessities, education, and information. We have a huge majority of Trump supporters who are white supremacists, white nationalists. We are in a time where immigration is a very dehumanizing hot topic, reduces people to numbers and laws, and ties morality in with laws. We have climate change deniers, which is ridiculous. And so, regardless of all of this, we still come together to celebrate on these big occasions. Like, regardless of all of this, we still come together. And so it makes me wonder, particularly in this space, what does it mean to be an ally? Not necessarily a queer ally, but an ally, an advocate for other people of color. Because to me, that is what I see in this congregation. To acknowledge, like, what do we do to acknowledge and celebrate Martin Luther King Day? What does wearing that ally badge mean for us? And again, to reference Samantha, I think it's the showing up. That is what this congregation does. It loves to show up. And I don't have any grand message to like end all of this with. I can't answer the question that I asked. It is not my question. However, I think it's interesting, having been surrounded by you for the last 2.5 years, to feel like this lovely, warm acceptance and this true blindness to color and true blindness to race in a way that doesn't make me, or hopefully anyone in this congregation, actually feel invisible by not seeing race or not seeing gender or not seeing color or whatever it is. And so I'm still unsure of exactly what we're celebrating for Martin Luther King Day. There's not a lot great going on, though we have made strides. Again, segregation is gone for the most part. We have made strides. But I think it's kind of okay to not know where we're going. And I think it's okay to be uncertain how to proceed through things that are constantly changing and that we're struggling with in society. I think it's okay that we celebrate the strides we made before. I think it's great that we celebrate Martin Luther King. And I think it's great that we are moving past an age of cultural appropriation, of understanding what it is, even if we don't know how to challenge it or how to face it. And we've all agreed that Martin Luther King's vision is a great one, one to move towards, to move beyond, and hopefully one day to reconceptualize once we've gotten to a place where that is not our main issue. And we can accept that despite the popularity of his vision, it is up to us to do the work to make it a true reality in the existences that we have now. Because you can hold it as much as you want, but in the showing up, we're making sure that this can become an actual reality. In your showing up, in my showing up, in us standing together in solidarity. And I've learned, especially from this congregation, that there are so many ways that we cannot understand each other's experiences, even though we can seek to try. And we will seek to try, and we'll find all those surprising nuggets within each other. But in seeking to understand each other, we can now have a different perspective on the songs that we sing for other people, or with other people, or by other people. And so, I've said "and so" a lot. And so, as you go towards Martin Luther King Day, I would hope that you would try to push even further beyond these movements and really looking into people. If you can see no color, and if you see no race, and if you see no gender, if you can push yourself to see even farther into the human circumstance on a very personal level, not in a book or in an online article, great as they may be and angry as they may make us, to push beyond that and to try to find or connect with some organization of marginalized people, even if it's only in your mind. If it's poetry, trying to look at it from a perspective that is not yours. If it is music, trying to look at the perspective in which it was written, and not how you belong in a movement, but how you can contribute to somebody else fighting for their own movement. And I hope you think of your voice as a vehicle for understanding, and a voice that stands equally alongside of the people that you fight beside, to defend them in their absence, or to rise beside them in their triumph. And on that note, if I could please have the MVUU choir come up here. The last